back for the Metamorphic Side Productions podcast. Hello, everyone. This is Hannah Sieber, soon to be Hannah Carter. Haven't legally changed my name yet. My husband's rolling his eyes. But I'm the department leader of Metamorphic Side Productions, and this is our podcast where we talk about film and Christianity. And today is a special podcast because I will actually not be moderating or leading this podcast, but will be, because he is, in my household, our household, the resident superhero connoisseur. What would you deem yourself, Will?
Chef superhero. I don't know. I put the mixture together and I make it all good.
Are you the Ratatouille of superhero films?
If Ratatouille was a good film, then maybe.
You didn't see Ratatouille?
No, I don't need to.
You saw the musical.
We're not going to talk about that either. I thought I was in charge here, and immediately Ratatouille.
Oh my gosh. We watched the TikTok Ratatouille musical for $5. We could only give $5, but it was he's like shaking his head. I loved that it was this like crowdsourced, crowd-funded, just like all these artists coming together and making something. It being a Zoom musical, I don't know if they used Zoom, but like it felt like a Zoom meeting, but as a musical. It was odd. I don't think the medium or the is that the right word? The medium's gonna catch on there, but it's the only Ratatouille you've seen is the TikTok musical.
I've seen clips from the movie, and I think I've seen the last 20 minutes of the actual film. It doesn't really spark any joy. It doesn't make me feel anything beyond that this is a thing that exists.
Interesting. But you do consider yourself the chef here of superhero films. How many superhero films have you seen in your lifetime?
I would say well over 50, probably leaning towards 100. If you include animated. If you don't include animated, it's probably around 40 to 50. Animated films bump it up heavily.
How many films are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and then the DC one, if you know?
I don't know numbers off the top of my head, but they've been doing it for over 10 years, so around 11 years. I think they average about between 3 and 5 movies a year, so I would say around 40 movies if we're betting smart. With DC, it's funny because their cinematic universe is kind of wonky right now. Not saying the films are necessarily wonky, but deciding what's in the universe and what's not is currently up for debate. I think right now it's, bear with me, Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, Justice League, Aquaman, the Harley Quinn movie, Wonder Woman 1984, and Shazam. So that's 9, and then 10 will be the Zack Snyder Justice League film, right. Even though technically it's replacing the original Justice League film. Right.
Have you seen every DC film except for Birds of Prey?
Well, I would say, there's like an 80s. Are you talking about in the current canon, or are you just talking about in general?
The current canon.
Yeah, all but Birds of Prey. I was not really interested in it, but I'll probably have to go back and see it to kind of keep up with the canon.
Okay. What were the 80s? What was that going on then?
I was going to say, so they came out with like a Supergirl movie in the 80s that I've never seen, and she battles like a dragon. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I think I've seen all 4 Superman films from the 70s and 80s. I've seen all the Batman films, and I've seen a couple of like the weird sub like category films that they came out with. They had one with Shaq where he played a guy named Steel. Yeah, that's pretty much. Most of them have been pretty. Oh, I saw Catwoman, but we're not going to pretend. We're going to pretend Catwoman doesn't exist.
From like 2003 with Halle Berry.
Yeah.
When I was a very little kid, I was like, oh, I love this movie. And I remember like when Marvel, and so it was like, I remember Catwoman came out, Fantastic Four is Marvel or DC?
Marvel.
It's Marvel. I remember Fantastic Four being the Silver Surfer movie, and I don't know what that's considered. Is it?
What do you mean?
Is it a bad movie or a good movie?
Mediocre.
Mediocre.
It really let down fans a lot. They had high expectations, and then when the main villain results in a cloud instead of an actual villain, it kind of lets everybody down.
Right. So, how many of the Marvel films have you seen? There's tons of them.
I've seen about, I would say 90% of them actually.
Wow.
Most of them because my brother wanted me to go with him, and so I saw them. I haven't seen the most recent Spider-Man, the most recent Ant-Man. I think that might be it. Most of them I actually saw in theaters too. I've seen all the Iron Man, all the Captain America, all the Avengers, the first Ant-Man. I saw Black Panther, both Hulks. Yeah, I think I saw all 3 Thors. The second one I've only seen about 75% of it. It's not great.
Is that the Ragnarok one?
No, that's the third one. Second one is Dark World, Dark Tomorrow, or something like that.
Okay, so as we've established just now talking that like superhero movies are everywhere and they are the biggest genre right now. Hi, Celine. My cat's here. Do you want to say something to our audience, Celine? She had no comment. Okay. But our culture is saturated with superheroes. Absolutely, to the point of like no return. And that's what we're talking about today. So it's the biggest genre right now that is in American culture is the superhero genre for film. And so I'm going to let Will take it away and kind of lead the conversation. But what we're mostly talking about is how does this cultural shift reflect like our needs and wants as a culture, but also as people, and how that connects to our need for a savior.
Okay, so I really want to start off with so we watched the movie Man of Steel. That was probably my third time seeing it through. Never really liked it from the beginning. I thought it was maybe a 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10. But it does have a lot to go off of when you're talking about superheroes and how they are portrayed in their world and the roles they play in ours. I'll do a quick recap of Man of Steel because there's a lot in that movie. It's fairly long. It's almost 3 hours long. So it's a fairly classic Superman story, but they have some twists in it. You start off on Krypton, and it's about to explode because of their mishandling of their own homeworld. Jor-El, Superman's father, and his wife have a child. It's the first natural birth they've had on their planet in hundreds of years, because the rest of the time they kind of get the egg and the sperm and they put it together and then they fertilize it in a safety box, so to speak. They're trying to get this child, their natural born child, off the planet so they can save him because the planet will explode. What happens essentially is the leader of their military, General Zod, and his soldiers try to stage a coup to save the planet. The coup fails, but General Zod is exiled with his soldiers, and he warns them that they will basically pay for ignoring him and his words, and so they exile him, and in the process of him being exiled, he ends up killing Superman's father. Superman's mother sends him away into a planet that he'll be safe. This planet is Earth. So they fast forward, and you get to kind of see little glimpses of Superman's life as he grows up, trying to deal with his powers because the atmosphere of Earth is different than the Krypton, and so his blood cells and his body handles the sun's radiation differently than it does on his home planet, and so it enhances his abilities. So of course he has super strength, super flight, X-ray vision, all of these lovely things. And so he's learning to cope with it in a world that is not used to it. And so, you see him as a child, you see him in school, you see him save his friends, and eventually his father tells him he can't reveal his powers to the world until the time is right, because the people don't know how to handle him. They won't know how to handle him being a superhero. So he goes into hiding. He does little things here and there to help save people. He helps save some victims of an oil rig fire. He gets them off there safely. He defends a woman who's being assaulted by a guy. He saves a school bus full of children. And then we fast forward to he's an adult, and he finds a ship from his home planet on Earth, and he finds out about his real dad. And he finds out his purpose is to help bring people together on Earth and unify the Kryptonian way of life and Earth and try to bring peace and harmony. Zod comes out of exile, finds what his name is Kal-El, but he's Clark Kent, finds him and says that Earth must deliver him to them so that Earth can be saved. Kal-El surrenders himself to the humans, and the humans then surrender him to the Kryptonians, Zod and his forces. Turns out Zod is actually not planning on giving up Superman, that Zod wants to terraform the Earth into recreating Krypton. And by terraforming Earth, he would kill all humans and rebuild Krypton from the ashes. So Superman decides to stop them with help from Lois and some people on Earth. And he has this huge battle with Zod's forces, and eventually it comes down to Zod versus Superman. They've nearly completely destroyed Metropolis. There's casualties in the hundreds of thousands. And it comes down to he has Zod in his hands, and Zod is about to kill a group of civilians with his laser vision, and Superman is forced to kill Zod to save human life. And it really hurts Superman to see that he had to kill people. He had to kill somebody to save the world. And so it hurts him and hurts his morality and his outlook on life that he was forced to take a life to save lives. And so you're left wondering of what the ramifications are of that. And you're left with a world that's wondering what to do now that we have a superhero, we have this superpowered being. And so the movie ends with you kind of pondering, and the world pondering what to do now that we have a Superman. What does this play out? How do we handle somebody who can destroy whole entire buildings with one punch?
Right.
Hannah is currently dealing with my cat, Grayson, which in his own way is interesting because he's named after a superhero. Anywho. So I kind of want to bounce off of that. So what are your thoughts on the film, Hannah, before we kind of get into the deep-rooted stuff?
So we picked Man of Steel because I had never seen it before. And I heard a lot of people say that it had a lot of Christ imagery in it. So actually, I saw a video, and I can link it in the YouTube channel. I forget the YouTuber's name who did it, but he broke down beat for beat how he believed that Man of Steel is like essentially plot-wise the same as Passion of the Christ. Even down to like the mythos of like Superman being born differently than everyone else and him coming from a different world to Earth. And it's kind of crazy how much like the plot points do kind of match up, specifically the movie The Passion of the Christ. All in all, just my general like how I felt about the film, I did it a 5-star rating. I gave it a 2.5 stars out of 5. It was kind of middle of the road. I felt like it was a little long, but at the same time, it felt like the plot was going by. Like there wasn't like any like connecting scenes. It felt like this is happening. Now we cut to this, and this is happening. And it just kind of goes and goes and goes and goes. It feels like there's a lot of story to be packed into this like one movie. I almost feel like maybe it should have been broken up more. Like maybe like we should have just had a film with Superman like realizing he's Superman. Like maybe like one film, the first film, his origin film, is like him trying to find the hidden spaceship that he'd find. Or am I skipping around or?
No, you're kind of giving the plot of Smallville right now.
Well, Smallville is like. Well, wait, does he look for a ship in Smallville?
It kind of like ruins of his past and stuff.
So, I feel like maybe like the first movie should have just been him searching for the answers and then getting the answers, and then the second movie is Zod. I feel like this is like too much in one because it felt like everything was moving along and we didn't have any time for like character development. It also made me feel like Superman was very, excuse the pun, but like alienated from the audience because he's not very relatable as a character because he's not human and he is, super in all these ways. But then like we don't get a lot of time to kind of sit with him in his feelings and emotions. Sometimes we do, but not a lot, not as enough as I feel was needed in this movie personally.
Okay. I mean, I didn't really care for this film in general. I saw it in theaters when it came out, and I kind of audibly laughed at it to the point where I laughed so much at it that I almost got thrown out of the film because there was some the camera cuts are a little weird. But rewatching it, and I have rewatching it after the sequels and after the character development, I could see where they were going, where he was going, the director, and I could see what they were trying to get across and trying to build a foundation for their universe. And so it kind of makes sense in a grander scheme, but as a singled out film, it is a little rough.
You said that they didn't plan on an extended universe the time they made this film. Is that true?
There are mixed reports with that. There are some that say that it wasn't. There was no plan, but then Warner Brothers always has plans in the future, and then they scrap plans and they rebuild plans. So it's very possible that somebody had these plans. Zack Snyder, the director, had a plan from Man of Steel on to if he was going to create a universe. And so he had laid the groundwork throughout that film for other things. Got it. Okay. So I kind of laid out some questions to kind of bounce off of. So Hannah made a reference to it's synonymous. This film is very synonymous with its Jesus imagery. I said I wanted to know what other things stood out to you. You mentioned the unique birth, and I know we mentioned coming from another world with powers. But what are some other Jesus imagery you saw in the film?
So, like, specifically, he does, like, everyone mentions this, but he does, like, the sign of the cross with his body, which I think is kind of, like, an obvious, like, he's the savior complex. I watched another video that talked specifically about, like, the mythology of superheroes, not just Superman, but they said that Superman is, like, the epitome of, like, mythology for superheroes because he's, like, a Christ-like figure, but he's also... he has a lot of like classical like Greek god like or Greek hero like qualities to him in his story, and so like he has to always be the symbol of peace and hope, and obviously Christ being eternal, he's eternally peace and hope, but it's different because he's God. Like everything about him is good and eternal. So I feel like they were trying to harp on that idea of superhero has to be like the symbol of goodness. Like there's some people who have experimented with like, what if Superman was a communist? What if Superman was evil? There's a movie called Brightburn where it's like Superman, but if Superman became a villain instead of a good guy. And like, but when it comes to the end of the day, everyone really wants Superman to be good. They want him to be like on the side of good. And they, not just so much because he's so powerful that if he were a villain it would be very bad, but also like people want to like have that something to look towards, I feel.
No, you're not wrong. I mean, I would disagree with the video you watched because one of the biggest parts of Greek and Roman gods is the fact that they are extremely flawed to the point where they easily succumb to human error and human mistakes. Superman tends not to do that. Superman, that's one of the reasons why there are a lot of fans, including myself, that are kind of sick and tired of Superman, because he's not flawed in the sense that he does make mistakes, but he doesn't fall victim to a lot of the desires of humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's a legitimate point because he said something like Hermes and Hercules. They do actually. There is like a whole like part like the Injustice storyline, I believe, where what
I was just gonna say that in the DC universe, the Greek pantheon is in the DC universe, and they are not superheroes, but they are members of it, to where they act upon the world and but they are not. It is very interesting the way they set up the DC universe is that they are not actually all powerful. They are very limited in the powers they have. They are just as flawed as they are in the original, like the Greek pantheon, but there are beings that are stronger than them, that are above them, that they answer to.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry, what I'm about to say kind of doesn't go off of that, so I apologize. It's not me, like...
Go ahead.
So in the Injustice storyline, it's like the Joker tricks Superman into killing Lois Lane, correct?
Yes.
That happens in Hercules. Like he has like a story that's like he has to go through so many trials or whatnot, and he gets tricked into murdering Megara and his children, and it drives him insane, I think. I've never read that story. I do know that he is tricked just like Superman is. But it is a very interesting point you bring, that like a big part of Greek gods and goddesses is that they are very human-like. They get angry, they get jealous, they cheat on their wives and their husbands, they get revenge, they are powerful, but they're flawed, and they reflect humanity in that way. But people do say that the way that the Greek myths they said that the way that the Greek myths were to the Renaissance, not so much to the Greeks, is the way that superheroes are to us. That like the stories of like Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, that their stories have like progressed like above and beyond themselves. Like they are like a legend onto their own at this point.
I mean, I would agree with that, and that's one of the points I kind of want to bring up, is that many people, like she referenced the video, many people consider them the American version of Greek and Roman gods, but we don't worship them. We don't have altars to them where we don't offer sacrifices, and we don't alter our lives to honor them and revere them. We understand their works of fiction. And so it's kind of interesting that many people consider it that, but in the sense that they are fictional characters, but we have used them to kind of express different feelings and emotions and thoughts on topics that we rather not talk about ourselves. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you is, so they are not technically our Greek and Roman gods because we don't worship them. But at what point do you think their role in our society goes too far?
So can you like kind of ask the question a different way?
Okay, so at what point in our culture does the role of our love and admiration for the superhero stories go too far, and it becomes less of a pop culture icon and more of it's closer to the worshiping.
So I think an important thing to realize. That's why I said what I think. So I said the way that the Greek legends and myths were to the Renaissance, not to the Greeks. So in the Renaissance, they didn't worship the Greek gods, but they used their stories as a benchmark of culture. They felt like, the Renaissance was this rebirth and going back to the classical Greek and Roman, and going back to that history and the kind of the cornerstone of Western civilization. And so I think that the way that the superheroes have reached that type of level, and it's funny because before superheroes, people compared Western heroes to Greek heroes, and people are like, what you mean, Westerns, like John Wayne? And yeah, so for a long time, Westerns dominated American cinema. And go ahead.
I was going to say, I would also add to that, all our American characters of lore. So we got, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, Abraham Lincoln, the stories of the Alamo and the stories of the revolutionary heroes. We had them on the same pedestal, if not higher than we have for superheroes now.
Right. Yes. So what that means when people say that, they mean that whatever it is, a cowboy, a superhero, revolutionary fighter, a founding father, that figure is not necessarily if it's a person, it's not necessarily the person, but that figure is a symbol that we put our ideals as a culture on. They represent ideals that we want to emulate in our culture. So for the Western hero, it was that grit, and it was I can do it all on my own. I can pull myself up on my bootstraps. I can pull myself up on my bootstraps. I can go and tame the West, and we can go out and we can manifest destiny. A lot of questionable stuff now. But for the superhero, I think it's the feeling of having power, of wanting to be able to make a change in our lives and also in the world we live in. I think is the desire that a lot of people have and see in the superhero, but also having that hope, having that there is a beacon of hope or some type of something good to look out for and look into to help us in our time of need.
Right. Yeah, and I would kind of agree with that. And something I was thinking about as I was preparing is that we are made in God's image. And so being made in God's image means that we get a fraction, a part of his creativity, his artistry, his abilities to create beautiful art and convey information, convey ideas. And so I kind of want to maybe talk about for a brief second how I believe that God can use these stories, these superhero stories, to remind his people of characteristics that we should be, that we can live out, but also to kind of point towards a lifestyle that we're supposed to live. And I know it means, it means not fighting crime. It doesn't mean to be a vigilante, but it means help the weak, defend honor, fight for justice, to be a beacon of hope in a world that needs it. So I kind of want to just talk about how any kind of thing, whether it be music, whether it be television, whether it be comic books, how God's image putting on us of creativity and art and symbolism and beauty can be conveyed, and how we can learn a little bit more about himself and his attributes and a lifestyle that we're supposed to be kind of admiring / pursuing, kind of reminders.
Yeah, exactly. It can be used for that. It the superhero genre can be used to remind us of what has God given to us to be good stewards over, and that is definitely like each other, and to have those traits of a hero of like fighting for love and justice and the truth. That most definitely I could see that. What was the other thing? Go ahead.
And this is kind of reference my current fandom that I'm really hardcore into is My Hero Academia.
Mm-hmm.
And they are really big into morals and virtues that are not too foreign to Christianity. Ideas of honor, truth, standing up for the people who can't defend themselves, and when you make a mistake, to own up to it and to ask for forgiveness. And so there is a continuing thread in that show where they say that, a true hero, what makes somebody a true hero is somebody who is willing to put aside their needs, to put aside themselves, and to help somebody else even when they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And that is almost at its core Christianity. Now, I'm not saying that the show is a Christian show, but the idea of putting aside my needs to help somebody else even when I don't have to is at the very core of the gospel.
Do you feel like people have like, when people see that, they inherently recognize like that as goodness, as God's goodness, and they are attracted to it because in a way it's like a truth and a goodness that they desire?
So I don't think they would be able to recognize it as God's goodness, especially if they're not saved. If they're saved, that's what makes, Christians in these fandoms see things a little differently. We no longer just see things as pop culture things, but we see them as reflections of our Savior in various ways. But for people who are not saved, when they see something, I believe the image of God that's in them recognizes when something is good, when something is wholesome, when something is admirable. And while they might not be able to put a finger on it saying, oh, that's a reflection of Jesus, a reflection of Father God, it's a reflection of what true goodness is, what true honesty and what true beauty is. And so the same people who can look at a sunset and recognize that is a very beautiful thing can look at, Batman saving a house full of children and realize, even though it's fiction, that is it's true. He doesn't have to do that, but he's choosing to save those people because they need him, and he recognizes that they need him, and he's the only one who can help them.
That's what I meant. I said, so I'm still like inherently, it's almost like makes it attractive to them. They're right. Attracted to that. And what I meant inherently is like you said, that part of them that is created after God, the image of God, recognizes it. But for us, we have, for those who are saved, we fully recognize it. We see the truth, and we recognize, that all goodness comes from God, and that like, this reminds me of Jesus.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But also I think something inside of us, I know there's like everyone says the God-shaped vacuum in our hearts. Mm-hmm. I know that's really cheesy and really cliche. But I think everybody, even Christians, have a desire for somebody to help them. That's for a hero. For like, they have like a need, or a need to be fulfilled for like a hero. Somebody to come along that is stronger than them, that is bigger than them, that they can look up to. I think everybody has a desire to find somebody they can look up to, that they can trust, they can admire, and then they can kind of not emulate their lives after, but see the good and see the good attributes in them and want to be more like them. And so what do you think about that, and how people can kind of look at superheroes and superhero movies and cartoons and be able to see, characteristics and stuff that they can fill that hero need?
I think that's also part of the gospel. I think that comes from, but once again, that like, in your knower thing. So what we're talking about right now is like, how does someone get saved, which is a point of contention in a lot of different circles of Christianity. You got, people who are John Calvinist. I couldn't think of the name. I kept saying tulip in my mind, and I was like, who's the person? And they think that, predestination and stuff like that. But a part of that is like realizing that you're a sinner and that you fall short of the glory of God and that you need a savior. That's like part of it, is when you realize that you are at the point now where you can see Jesus for who he is. So I think that speaks to that, where they want for a hero who is bigger and stronger and capable, because we realize we're not capable. We can't do it.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that is part of the reason people are people create superheroes, but also people admire them, is because we realize not only are we, messed up, but the people around us are too.
Yeah.
The people that we want to trust, our parents, our teachers, our, fellow athletes, or celebrities, they're flawed, and we constantly get these things where we look up to somebody, and then in the news they get outed as doing something terrible. But in the comic books, your heroes, even if they mess up, will always make things right. And so I think that's really compelling, because we technically have created these characters to do what we need them to do, is to kind of fulfill that void. If we're not saved, we can use these characters to fill that void temporarily, as we try to search for somebody real.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And right now in our culture, when I was growing up, and when you're growing up too, like the Got Milk campaign. You remember like the big posters where it was like Kobe Bryant, or who's someone else was big, Shaquille O'Neal. It was always like basketball players. But like these big athletes, sometimes they were celebrities, and they had like the milk mustache, and it'd be like Got Milk, and it was always big posters that you get like in like the cafeteria and stuff. But like the whole point of that whole marketing campaign was that these were people that kids looked up to, that they were their heroes, their role models, and that they had influence over them. And so that's why they got them to like promote milk. But we grew up with this whole like, look towards these role models, look towards these, people who are athletes and actors and politicians. I know he's rolling his eyes, but there was a big push there to find role models and look up to them. I even had to write like essays in school and stuff about like, pick someone that you look up to in your life. It can be a family member, it can be a famous person or something like that. And now, as we've gotten older, especially now, so many people have like been shown they've been shown to be sinners. They've been shown to be not great people, because no one is great, no one is good. And I think it's really messed with a lot of our feelings towards the world we lived in, because for a long time we had this like basic assumption, especially told this to kids, that like people in the public eye and people in your family and stuff, they're good, and they're heroes, and they're people we should like be able to look up to. And now we're like tearing all that down. So it makes sense that like superhero movies, where them being fictional, we don't have to worry about that we're like loving them right now. What?
It's kind of funny though, because even though we kind of see that in our superheroes, if you pick up a comic book, you're going to see heroes that are saving the day, saving burning buildings, all that stuff. But a lot of these movies, especially the two big ones we're going to talk about today, Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, really explore what happens if our heroes are flawed. What happens if they are, they make mistakes, and how does that change our perception of them? And so we're going to talk about it just briefly, but Batman vs. Superman really dives into this. Like, Batman at one point says, how many people do we know are good? And how many of them stayed that way when they started being heroes? So when they started being heroes, all their closest friends were good guys, and then people left them. People joined the bad guys. People abandoned them. How many people start off as good, and how many people end up turning their backs on us? And so they explore a lot of this stuff. So it explores, what if the people we think are good can't actually be trusted? And so it's kind of want to round it back around, because when we think about this hero archetype, the perfect one we always kind of go back to is Superman, because he's, he helps the people in need. He saves, kids up a tree. He does whatever he needs to do. So when we think of superheroes, we think of Superman, because the people in his world, his universe, realize that they can't do anything. They are helpless, and they need to cry out for Superman, and Superman flies in and does stuff they can't do. And so Man of Steel really explores that, and so kind of want to round it back around, because this is a perfect example of what we've been talking about.
Yes, we planned it that way, right? From the beginning. Oh yeah.
So one of the things I do, so Man of Steel really does hearken on Superman being a classical hero, of being like this savior to humanity, because he has to do that several times. But we also see how he is compared to Jesus. Like, even though they don't audibly say, "Oh, you're like Jesus," but they do say, how they do show in his actions how they're making him out to be very similar. So when he's growing up, he goes through these trials. He goes through various trials. What do you think about those trials? And do you think it's like a comparison to Jesus's trials going from childhood to adulthood?
We don't know a lot about Jesus's childhood. We see his birth, and in the Catholic Bible they have like stories of when he was younger, but we know of his birth, and then he starts his ministry at 33. And the one part where he's in the temple when he's 12. So this is another part where that YouTuber was like, oh, this is like Passion of the Christ, because in that movie they like speculate like, what was it like to grow up as Jesus? They like go into his childhood a little bit, and they're like, what's it like to be God and a 9-year-old kid at the same time? And so in Man of Steel, they basically show Clark trying to like keep a low profile. He doesn't want people to really look at him or see him, because he knows that he's different.
Until his time has come. And
at 33 years old.
They specifically say he's 33 years old, and he has to wait until his time comes before he can use his powers publicly.
And his father was his earthly father, but his father is
disappears when he's a child.
True. But also says that, like, tells him that, like, oh, you'll have like your time or whatnot. So what we were talking about him like growing up. Interesting. This YouTube video also made the point. The guy on the bus. So there was like a bully kid that it's like a redheaded bully kid, and he's on the same bus as Clark, and they get in a horrible accident, and Clark decides to save the bus, even though like people obviously see him lift the bus out of the water, and everyone's freaking out about it, and his parents are kind of like, oh, it's just like weird adrenaline strength, like, or you're just seeing stuff. But like the bully kid never forgets that, and he actually stops bullying him pretty much. He like protects him a little bit. And then later Lois Lane goes to question him about Clark. She follows like this path to find out who he is, because they meet and she doesn't know his name. And his name, the guy that she goes to, the bully kid, his name is Peter. And the guy was like, and then this guy named Peter goes and they have to ask him questions about the main character. And it was like, wow, okay. Even though their relationship, Jesus' relationship with Peter is way different. Yeah, so they had that whole thing.
I mean, kind of on the same train, what do you think about the scene where Clark goes into the church for answers right before he surrenders himself? So he goes into the church seeking answers from a priest, and the priest says, just have faith. That's all the priest is able to say, because he kind of shrugs his shoulders. He's like, I don't know what to do, but you just got to have faith. And it feels like they're kind of making a nod at religion and reference to like the religious leaders of that time period.
For sure. They have like this shot where he's like sitting down and talking to the pastor, and there's a clear stained glass window of Jesus right behind him over his shoulder. And it's definitely like they're really pushing it that he's like a Christ-like figure. And that and so it is implied that Superman believes in the Christian God because he goes to this pastor for advice, even though he's Superman and he already knows about aliens and all this stuff. He's like, nah, like I believe that there's a higher power and that it's specifically this one. So they imply that he has at least some Christian belief in the movie because he goes to advice from the pastor. I don't know about the whole just have faith thing. I really don't. I feel like that's a weird answer for the situation that they're in because, first of all, this is something that this guy has never, ever seen before. He's never seen a Superman before, and he doesn't know the situation at all. But he's like, sometimes you just have to jump before you look or something like that. And it feels like one of those mystical movie moments where it's like this character just like has the thing to say that's like the right feel for the time, even though it doesn't really make sense. So I don't know. I don't know how you felt about it.
It was kind of a mixed feeling because, you know, our relationship with Christ is based on faith. And so it does take moments where we have to just trust Christ, even when things seem at its bleakest. But at the same time, the one character who is like clearly the direction for religion, who's supposed to be the source of answers that many people go to, he shrugs his shoulders and says, I don't know what to tell you. But it makes sense too, because I'm like, if I expect to go to my pastor and there's like an alien invasion happening and like turns out I'm the alien, you know, what am I really expecting there? But he doesn't say, you know, forget God. He just says have faith.
Yeah. So what he's saying to have faith in is like, I think he's saying have faith in people actually though. Cause he's saying like, oh, I'm going to go reveal myself. And I think it's the right thing to do, but I'm not sure. And the guy's like, I wonder if that's just like this guy's like, this is my opportunity to save the human race. And he like, it's like, you have to go and do it because we need to like be safe or something. I don't know. I want to know what like Zack Snyder at that time directed that actor. Like when you direct, you talk to an actor about your character's motivation. And the actor usually gets to input like what their character is being motivated by. So I wonder what the conversation was on set between Zack Snyder and that actor that played the pastor and being like, why are you saying this right now? Because that will like, I really wonder like what he was thinking.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and also it plays directly into what happens next because he just goes out in full costume for the first time.
It just cuts to him floating in front of the military.
Right, yeah. He's full costume in front of the military. He's like, I'm here, guys. And so I know what they're reminiscing. I know what they're connecting to. But what do you think about the idea of him not only surrendering himself to humanity because he is Superman from another planet, from another world, surrendering himself to people, and they merely make it very clear that he could destroy everything around him. He could be free anytime he wants. He chooses not to be. And he not only surrenders himself to humanity, he surrenders himself to people from his own home world. Mm-hmm. And so that feels very Gethsemane-like.
Yeah, for sure. Because that's definitely, like, in that moment, if we're going through the Jesus story, he surrenders himself to authority. He goes to Pontius Pilate. He lets himself get arrested. But before that, he surrenders to the will of his father. And, like, if we're going to, like, one-to-one analogy here, Russell Crowe, Jor-El, or whatever, is God, I guess, in this.
And that's the thing, because in one sense, Zod kind of plays not only a Satan role, but also a God role. Because he's Satan because he wants to destroy humanity. But he's also God at one point because he says that everything I do, no matter how many lives I take, is for the greater good.
He believes it's for the greater good.
Right. And so, I mean, in the Jesus narrative, Jesus surrenders himself to God, and God has to punish him for the sake of everybody else. But in reality, it's Satan is also doing stuff too, and so it kind of like at this point the comparison breaks down, I feel like, pretty heavily.
But I think yes, there is the whole thing of him letting himself be taken to save humanity, and and he does this. I mean, Jor-El does say, "Oh, your time has come to use your powers and to say." Like, there's that whole scene where he's like, go, and he like floats out of the spaceship, and he's like in the T pose, and he's like looks like he's on the cross. Yes.
So, kind of going along with this, Jor-El tells Kal-El, he says, You will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you. They will stumble. They will fall. But in time, they will join you in the sun, Cal. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders.
Yeah, that sounded very like, because you will stumble and fall. It's very biblical language.
Yeah, they will stumble. They will fall.
But in time,
they will join you in the sun.
It almost sounds like, yes, the followers of Jesus will follow behind him, and then one day they will be reunited, and we'll all be in the new heaven and new earth. It sounds like that. And so I was like, I think Zack Snyder was trying really hard to like make that like he wanted it to be like Jesus-y. I don't know why. Do you know why?
No, not a clue. Because I mean, spoiler alert, if you've not seen it, in Batman vs. Superman, he sacrifices himself again and dies to save humanity. Mm-hmm. And then in Justice League, he rises from the dead. Mm-hmm. So, not necessarily sure where Zack Snyder's religious stance is, but I mean, there's a lot of Jesus in Superman's story arc that he creates.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's also in his original story, too. Like, in comics, they do that, too. I mean, he's died and been risen from the dead how many times?
Like 2 or 3.
Yeah. I feel like... has Batman been killed and risen from the dead?
Anytime he dies, it's always like, he wasn't really dead, guys.
What about Wonder Woman?
Oh, yeah. She died in the Crisis in the 80s.
Right. So it's not uncommon for other superheroes to die and come back. It's not weird. But
it is weird when he dies and he comes back the way like people realize they need him, so they wait and he comes back. You know, but well, that's another time, I feel like. So this is more of a personal question because you made a video a couple months ago about horror and demon possession movies and how that relates to Christianity. There's a line in the movie where it says, people are afraid of what they don't understand. Do you find this true or not so much?
Oh, yeah. People are afraid of what they don't understand, for sure. I think that's one of the ways that the devil works against us, because he can use a lot of things that we simply don't understand to make us afraid. So where are you going with in connection to the superhero and Man of Steel?
I'm not really going anywhere super deep, because partially I was going to say people really are afraid of what they choose not to understand. Some people choose not to. Now, this is not everything because I don't understand space, and space scares me, and that's just not, and I know enough about it to know I'm scared of it. Yeah. But there are people who choose not to understand certain things and they live in fear of it, and by fear, it's not necessarily like, scream. It's
like hatred
or, disdain. But I think this kind of plays into, so people are afraid of Superman because they're like, they don't understand Superman. They don't understand his powers. They don't understand what he's doing. Because the general person does not know he's an alien. Mm-hmm. The general person does not know he's from Earth. He's not from Earth. That he just is flying and he's tearing down buildings.
Right.
And so there's that. But then you compare it to like Christianity. People don't necessarily know a whole lot about Christ. Mm-hmm. And unless you're a Christian, you don't know a whole lot about Christ. And so there can be this fear, especially if you're hearing that, if people, because there are a lot of Christians who love going around talking about just Revelation and what Jesus is about to do. Right. And if you don't look into it, you don't seek to understand it, it could be terrifying. Why would I want to look into something where he's supposed to destroy this and destroy that? Right.
Yeah, I think that's a huge stumbling block for when you evangelize. So I've done a couple of small evangelisms when I was in college. Or just when you talk to people about your faith. I used to talk to people all the time. Like I'd be working at my barista job and people would just talk in the back room and they would ask you about, oh, you go to church and stuff like that. And they ask you questions. A big stumbling block is that people will ask a question and you can give them an answer, but they don't care to really understand it. People don't want to actually like understand God and Jesus. They don't want to like be like, okay, like what does the Bible really say? They want to be like, I can say whatever I want and I can live by it. They kind of know that if they were to admit that it makes sense or that it's true, especially if it's true, then it would change their life. People don't want to have to change their life. I think that's a big one. They kind of want, they want to remain ignorant, because if they don't remain ignorant, then they have to like argue either for or against it. And then they could be wrong. They could be proved wrong, and then they would have to change. And that they don't want that. I think that's what a lot of it comes down to. But
I think also it's, they spend a lot of time in college classes or casually going to church, something like that, and they hear all this stuff, the judgment, the fire, the destruction from either the Old Testament or the future, and they don't have any context. They just see what they see, and then they deal with it. And they deal with it in fear, or they deal with it in worry, disdain, or because they are afraid of it, they choose not to look into it, understand it. And this kind of actually plays into Batman versus Superman. But I just wanted to kind of, before we jump into that, because the two are, the Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, like back to back. They literally happen coinciding almost. So we're going to get into that in just a second. But I wanted to kind of talk about just a little more. So how can we alleviate something like this, where the lack of understanding or full picture, full context is what's causing a lot of the problems in evangelism today, where people have preconceived pictures, or they hear bits and pieces about God. They don't get the full picture, and they automatically put the fear up. They put the disdain. They put the worry.
So there's this book. I don't know if you know where this is going.
Oh, boy.
There's this book that I gave to Will the first week we were dating. He didn't finish it. I don't think it's on our bookshelf right now. He's like, oh, great. It's this book by Greg Koukl called Tactics. And I read it once. I want to reread it again. But I was given this book in college through this wonderful wonderful ministry called Rasha Christi. They've changed my life. I spent a lot of time there. I go to church. We go to church now with people who work for Rasha Christi. But this book called Tactics by Greg Koukl is a great tool in not just talking about Jesus, but just having better conversations in general. So what he does is he's like, okay, when you talk to someone about their worldview, first of all, if someone is asking you to defend their worldview, that's wrong. Like, it's basically saying someone says Jesus isn't real, and then they turn to you and they say, now prove it. That's not how argument works. They have to prove it. They made the statement. So, like, when they're telling you about their worldview and you want to, like, tell them about Jesus, a good thing to do is to ask questions and kind of lead them to logically think out why they believe what they believe. And once you get them to kind of deconstruct their belief system, you can start logically telling them about Jesus. It helps you explain more logically what you believe and why you believe it. I think that would be the way I would handle that. He's like, great, you gave the textbook answer. I can't believe you.
I was more mad that you roasted me, and however many people are going to hear this. Great.
Right now we have 16 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So
you're going to be a very famous person one day. Somebody's going to look back on this and find out that
you didn't read Tactics.
But this is perfect. This is a perfect jumping point, because so while Man of Steel does the whole like, shh, secret, it's about Jesus, and you're supposed to try to guess and like hint, hint, wink, wink. Batman vs Superman actually like legitimately says everything that they want you to see, because they will audibly say, God, they will reference God, demons, like actual theological arguments are mentioned in Batman versus Superman, because the whole premise of it is, if they're treating Superman, they're saying Superman is a god or is God. And if that's the case, then everyone else is man, and we have to react to this. How you react to this says what you believe about God or this being. Okay, and so the whole idea so Lex Luthor, I'm not going to get into the whole story, but Lex Luthor wants to pit Batman, who is a human, against this godlike being, because, and he reveals this, that when he was growing up, he had a belief in God, and his father beat him, and because his father beat him and he cried out to God for help, God never answered. Therefore, he has this enmity with God, this anger towards God, and he sees Superman, even if Superman's not God, he sees that people think of him as God, that treat him like a god, and so he wants to punish that god for existing because of all the pain he went through as a child. And so he audibly says these things, and so Batman even says at one point, you were never a god, you were not even a man. You had no excuse talking about this kind of stuff or accepting this praise and worship, because people start worshiping him in the second movie. They start crying out to him, wearing his shirts and creating monuments to him because they see him as a godlike figure. And Batman's like, you're not God. You're not even a man anymore. You're just an alien. So there's a lot of quotes I kind of want to go through because we didn't get a chance to walk through the movie, but I want to go through them. So picking up where we left off, because we had to take a momentary break to fiend off some robot overlords that had invaded our podcast booth. We're back, and we're better than ever. And we're picking up talking about Batman versus Superman, because it is the direct sequel to Man of Steel, but it's also the one that deals with heavy religious issues in response to the fact that if a person that has all these powers exists, are they a god? Should they be worshipped as a god? And what is their role in our society? Okay. But the character of Lex Luthor actually comes from a religious perspective where he blames God for being inactive in his childhood when he was being abused by his father. And so he says that, this God was not involved in my childhood. I was abused. I grew up with this disdain for God. And because I had this disdain, I see this person who is worshipped as a god, and I want to make him, because I can't punish the actual God, I will punish this character, this person, in his stead. And so one of the biggest quotes that still rings true is from Lex when he is facing off against Superman. He says, if God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he is all good, then he cannot be all-powerful. Basically saying, if God actually has all the power in the world, then obviously he's not good because he didn't help me when I needed him most. And if he is all good, if he's the best source of goodness in the world and in the universe, then obviously he's not powerful enough because he couldn't save me. And so this is a really common argument that it's really good to bring up, because this is not only just a superhero conversation, but this is also a theological conversation.
Yes, this is a very common argument, and I forget the official name of it. I think it's like something paradox. But it's, do you want me to talk about like how I would answer this, or do you want to wait for that, or like?
No, go ahead.
So it's a basic misunderstanding of when we mean that God is all good. So it's also a misunderstanding about how the will of man works into all this. So if God is all good, what we mean by that is that he defines goodness. What we see as good and desirable, and what we were talking about earlier, like love, truth, hope, those things that we see as good, even like pleasure in the most basic sense, that is of God. God is goodness. So he is entirely good. There is nothing bad within him. He is good. So when we say God is good, it's not like, oh yeah, he's good all the time. No. He is goodness. He is good. So to answer Lex's problem, you have to go back to the garden and you have to say that man fell and they decided to not follow God's commandments and they let sin into the world, which is not of God's goodness. So God allows man to have free will, which does affect events. Now, God is powerful over those events. Like, he has ultimate control of, what happens. But he uses what man does. He uses what men do for his own will. He doesn't force anyone to sin, but people sin. And when they sin, it causes evil, which is not of God, to come into the world. And so God is all powerful, but he is also all good, and he understands how to be both. So there's this guy, I forget the quote, but he said, if I had all of God's power, I would change everything, but if I had all of God's knowledge, I wouldn't change anything. So it's this idea of that we don't know what it's like to be God, and so but we're judging him anyway, being like, oh, you're all powerful and all good. Well, obviously you can't be, because this and this. That's saying that us in our finite position can make a better judgment call than God, who is infinite and can see everything at once and understand everything at once. Right.
No, I would completely agree with that. And I think it's kind of funny because while that is all true, in this universe or anything superhero related, once you get a godlike character, the regular humans kind of use this opportunity to vent their frustrations at the actual God on this godlike character. Mm-hmm. So in Batman vs. Superman, Lex punishes and attacks Superman because of his actual relationship with God.
Right.
And the people blame Superman because Superman, is set up to look like a failure. He's set up to make mistakes, and so they vent their frustrations with the actual God of the universe on this person because they're calling him a god, and since they can't physically yell at the actual God of the universe, they'll yell at this godlike figure, and they will point fingers, they will boo, they will jeer, they will yell, they will throw things. But at the end of the day, and this is a very interesting play on it, even though Superman's attacked by humans, attacked by Batman, who's another good guy character, and who's attacked by Lex, he still chooses to sacrifice his life for the good of humanity. And so there's a lot to kind of unfold with that, but it kind of makes you kind of think, when given the opportunity, people tend to blame God for all the wrong in the world, and yet God still chose to die for us. He knew that we were going to do that. He knew that we were going to blame him for all the evil. We're going to blame him for all of our mistakes and for everything going wrong, and yet he knew that he still chose to die for us.
Yeah, and that is showing his infinite, love, infinite goodness. We are finite. We have a breaking point where we cannot bring ourselves to do all that God can and is willing to do. Even going back to the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ knows he's going to take on the wrath of his Father, and he knows what that is. And he knows he's going to do it for people, even people who are you and me who are saved. There are times where we disgrace Christ by how we act. There are times where we get angry at God. There are times where we aren't the perfect Christian, and he goes through all of that for our sake, for the sake of his church, and and even for people to have the opportunity to be saved. And yeah, it's that's what's praiseworthy. And I mean, he's, by being God, he's praiseworthy. There's nothing he did. It's just who he is. He's praiseworthy by being God. Don't get me wrong. But realizing that, like, that's where that awe, the like coming in and being like, he is the hero, the real hero that we're talking about here.
Yeah. No, at the end of the day, we talk about superheroes all day and how they can be symbolic of Christ, or we can learn really good attributes or life lessons from heroic stories of superheroes or real historical people. But at the end of the day, the real hero, everything, it goes back to Christ, because the abilities we have to be heroic, the abilities we have to be good and helpful and choosing justice and choosing teamwork and choosing to fight against evil, all comes from Christ. We have all that knowledge, all that ability, all that skill coming from Christ and coming from God our Father. We could not create a comic book character. We could not create an anime character. We could not create a superhero based on these ideals without these ideals actually existing. And so these are just shadows of the true ideal. So I have no problem with, celebrating and choosing to take joy in superheroes and anime and all that stuff, because I see it as reflections very dimly of our Savior, that we see attributes that he has given to us, and we can create other pictures of it, but all of it goes back to the cross. All of it goes back to Christ.
Right. Going off of the whole God is goodness. So any depiction of goodness is a small depiction of God. He is the originator. Christ, who is also God, is the originator of all the things that we love about superheroes. Without God, we wouldn't have anything worth, like, I'm trying to put it into words, because it's a high philosophical thing. You said it very well. But yeah, I think you said that without God, we wouldn't even have these traits. I think it's how you put it.
Yeah.
That this is kind of what we're talking about how superheroes and this culture we have of the hero is reflecting our human need for a savior. That deep down in our basic DNA, because we are made in the image of God, we seek out his face. And for those who are saved, even more so. I think people who are not saved, I think they do crave that. I think they're attracted to it. I think they recognize it in a very basic form. But once you are saved, it's different. And I agree with you that it's wonderful to be able to see God's goodness, even in something as benign as a superhero movie, and recognize that he gave us this goodness.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really say any more about it, because we could spend all day breaking down just Batman versus Superman, because there's so much in it that is common theological issues that are prevalent in our culture today. Or we could talk about how many superhero stories have referenced Christ or referenced God. I could get into that for a lot of podcasts, but at the end of the day, this is the core of the issue, is that when you look at a superhero, instead of seeing it as just a form of pop culture or just a reflection of American culture or whatever, look at it as a reflection of your Savior. Yeah, there's going to be really messed up stuff in it, because humans still made it. Humans still make it, but as humans, we are reflections of our Savior at the same time, and so the good that we are able to do is good from him. Mm-hmm. The good that we are able to create is a reflection from him in us. Anything good we can do is not even our own.
Right.
So anything beautiful, any TV show, any movie that is beautiful is all because of him.
Yeah. And going back to, do you have more questions about Batman versus Superman?
I can check.
But like going off the whole, so by the way, Lex Luthor in this movie is played by
Jesse Eisenberg,
which I never, ever would have cast him as that. It was very odd of a choice. I don't know how you felt about it.
I didn't really get behind it until they shaved his head at the end when he's in prison, and then I'm like, okay, it's still a little weird because I'm so used to him.
Big Lex Luthor.
Big Lex Luthor, played by Clancy Brown, who's got like this deep, intense voice and this presence. Jesse Eisenberg played like a more sneaky, conniving, cunning version of the character, but it grew on me. Now, when you said I have two more quotes from the movie that I kind of want to talk about real quick, if that's okay.
Okay, I was going to finish this thought real quick.
Go for it.
Let me get it back on the tracks real quick. So going off of what Lex was saying about like, why did this happen to me? Why didn't God step in? Why did this bad thing happen to me? Like, the real question to ask is not why do bad things happen to good people, but why do good things happen to bad people? Because we're all bad people, and yet good things still happen to us. And so that's like the mindset shift that I think. Wait, did that come out right?
Yes.
Okay, you gave me a face. I was like, oh no. Mindset shift that comes when you are saved and when you realize you're a sinner is that everyone is bad. And so when good things happen to you, it's more weird than when bad thing. I mean, no one wants bad things to happen, and even God doesn't want bad things to happen to you. Like, it'll happen right now because we're in a broken world, and he can use every amount of bad thing to work it out to your good. And obviously when Christ comes back, like, the bad things will go away. At the end of the day, we're all bad people, and that the fact that God still gives us mercy and grace and that he still allows good things to happen to us is like the true, like, well, why does that happen?
Yeah, I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Right after Lex goes on about if God is all powerful, he cannot be all good, and all good, not all powerful. He reveals like this conniving plan to basically thwart Superman and make him submit to him because he has to do whatever Lex says. And he has a line, and it says, "And now God bends to my will." And it's very interesting because it's talking. If you have the mindset that, okay, he's making this quote-unquote godlike character be punished for the mistakes of the actual God of the universe, then he's saying, well, God, I tried asking God for help. He wouldn't help me, so now I'm making God do what I tell him to do. And so I found that was really interesting because, again, that's a perspective that a lot of people have, is like they want God to do what they tell him to do, and when God doesn't, then God is obviously bad.
That goes back to the whole, like, oh, in our position, we think we have the right to be like, oh, you're good or bad. Like, people believe, oh yeah, I can judge God. But we don't have that position. We just don't. We are not like him at all. It's kind of like, in a weird way, it's like when you're a very little child and your parent takes away something from you, and you're like, you get very angry and you think that they're wrong, and you stomp and you get upset and you say, you're bad and I hate you. And then when you get an adult, you realize the thing they took away from you was like a pair of scissors. And you're like, oh, they were being a good parent. They were doing what was best for me. But when you're 3 or 2, let's say when you're 2, you don't have the position, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the maturity, you don't have everything that your parent has to recognize what you're doing is bad and it will hurt you. And so when your parent steps in and takes it away from you, you get very upset and angry, but that's the good thing for them to do.
Yeah, I would agree. Sometimes we think we know. We don't even know ourselves as best as God does. So obviously we don't even know our life story as best as Christ will. So to say that I know better than you is silly. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's like if you went up to somebody who is a professional football player and you say, I happen to know football better than you do.
It's like that vibe. He's like, I think I know more about American Girl dolls than you do, genius, or whatever.
Right, but neither of us know more about football than a football player. And so for us to go up to a football player and say we know the game better than they do obviously shows our ignorance, but also our lack of self-awareness. And so on a grander scale, if we're willing to admit God exists because we're talking to him, then by all definitions, a God must know more than we do.
Exactly.
And by that definition, meaning that we don't know as much as we think we do. Okay, so my last quote, and then we'll kind of wrap it up from here, is from Lex one more time, because he is very much the source of religious conversation in this film.
He's the edgelord of the film.
So he says, "We know better now that devils don't come from the hell beneath us. They come from the sky."
Wow.
So the idea that the real source of our problems aren't from hell, but that the heaven is what creates our problems. Heaven is the source of all bad, the source of all wrong, the source of all our troubles come from the heavenly realms. What do you think about that? Because that's another theological argument, that God created evil, that God is the source of all the problems, that he's the one that's caused it all.
So this is really sticky and really intense. The reason why is because there's a lot of different interpretation about this.
We don't have to go into it we don't have to go like super deep. We could just talk about it in perspective of the movie.
Right, because there are people who are not Christian at all who believe that and think that God he created it and he wanted us to fail and he wanted us to sin. Then there's hyper Calvinists who think logically you have to come to that conclusion that God predetermined for this to happen. No, I do not believe that God created evil or caused us to sin. For some reason, it is important to the makeup of us being made in his image to have free will. I believe the reason why we have free will is so that we continue to bear his image as God. I don't know if you agree with that.
To an extent, yeah.
So God would not take it away because that would change to our core of what we are. We wouldn't be man at that point. We would be something else.
Right.
So God let us have free will. We use that free will to disobey him and to let sin enter the world. And he could have destroyed us and started over, but he didn't. He decided to save us and to make a way for us to be redeemed and atoned for, and reunited with him. And I think this whole God is really the source of all the problems, that has Satan written all over it. He wrote that with his own hand and signed it.
Well, in even simpler terms, anytime we blame God for the problems of the world or the problems in our lives, we really need to put the blame on ourselves. We're really the source of almost all of our own issues, is because of, even at the most core of the cores, we're sinful. Right. We are sinners and we have corrupted the world. Even if it's just I'm sick, it's because the world is broken. But if it's I'm in jail or I'm in, this bad relationship, it's our fault.
Now, there are times where it's definitely not. People do get sinned against.
Right, yes.
Lex, when he was a child, was sinned against. If you were someone who experienced child abuse or you were, hurt or somehow, that's not your fault. People do sin against other people, and that's their fault. They're the ones who are at fault for that. But that sin does cause suffering, and that's something that God hates. I mean, when Lazarus died, it shows that Christ mourned for him. And you're like, well, why are you talking about that now? Because death is what comes from sin. And so when Christ mourned for Lazarus, he's really saying, I acknowledge that death happens because of sin and it makes me sad. And so he's acknowledging that your suffering makes him sad because it's a result from sin. It's something that he realizes is horrible and wrong, but you can be sinned against. It doesn't mean that the sin that was happened against you was God's fault, but it certainly doesn't mean that it was your fault. Sometimes it is your fault. Sometimes we do sin against ourselves and we do make really bad decisions that fall upon our own heads. But it's the wisdom to know the difference.
Right, and I would agree with all of that. I guess to wrap it up, since I've been given the lovely wheel here, is just that you can find, I hate saying this because it sounds really churchy, but you can find God in anything, because anything good has his fingerprints on it. And so a lot of times what happens is, in almost anything, you can try to make a theological argument or a argument about God or against God in anything. And so when we're talking about here is finding the attributes and seeing the attributes of God in the creation of these comic book characters and these superheroes. And then when we see their stories played out, almost always, in almost any medium that this happens in, is that there's always some kind of character or arc where their authority, their power, their goodness is challenged because they are seen in a godlike way. And so it is that creator's way, that character's way, that writer's way of challenging the idea of God, challenging the idea of a good being that is powerful. And so you could really find that in any superhero thing, because anytime there's a being that is more powerful than an average human, people immediately put that in a all-powerful godlike role, and we throw blame at them if something bad happens. It was your fault this happened, and so while you can't actually yell at God, you can't actually get an argument with God, you can sure yell at X and Y superhero. And so a lot of times you can see from a non-Christian perspective that people like to create these characters and these arcs where their characters get yelled at and kind of vented against for their mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think, they're used kind of like a cosmic punching bag almost.
Yeah, and so you could see that. You can learn a lot from, basically the moral of stories. You can learn a lot from comic books and superheroes in more ways than you think you can.
And a hero save us. Just gotta stand here and wait. Is that the lyrics?
Cut that part out, Hannah.
No, I'm not. I'm gonna leave it in.
Okay.
Do you remember the lyrics of that song?
No, I every time that came on, I turned the channel.
It was for Spider-Man.
It didn't need to be in Spider-Man.
Okay. Well, is that it?
That is it.
Okay. So it's the first podcast of 2021. Woo! And we are so happy to have you back and to talk about this really cool topic. I know that Will was super excited. He's been wanting to do this since we started M.S.P. And hopefully we'll get to talk about this topic later. But yeah, so that would be it. So if you would like to subscribe to the YouTube channel, please do that. I'm still working on trying to get SoundCloud to work. I'm so sorry that our last two podcasts aren't available for download right now, but we'll find that out soon. But you can listen to this for free on our YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button down below, and we will see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.